What if your greatest achievements and your deepest failures are actually just anchors keeping you trapped in an obsolete version of yourself? We are taught to cherish our memories, but they are often just limitations on our future potential. It's time to stop letting your yesterday dictate your tomorrow. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't arrive with drama or clarity. It arrives quietly, like a thought you almost dismiss. A strange realization that the past has stopped guiding you and started controlling you. That the stories you tell about who you are were written during moments of survival, not intention. And that somewhere along the way, without ever deciding to, you began living as an extension of what already happened instead of a blueprint for what could exist next. Most people believe the past is something you carry for wisdom. But more often than not, we carry it for permission. Permission to stay small. Permission to hesitate. Permission to explain away the life we never built. We say we're being realistic, but what we're really doing is staying loyal to a version of ourselves that no longer fits. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. There's a subtle comfort in knowing exactly who you are, even when that identity hurts you. The past gives structure, it gives explanation, it gives a script. When something goes wrong, you know why. When you hesitate, you know the reason. When you feel stuck, you can trace it back to a moment, a failure, a wound, a time when things didn't go as planned. And that clarity feels safe, predictable, controlled. But safety is not the same thing as freedom. At some point, the identity shaped by your past stops protecting you and starts limiting you. It tells you what you can't do before you even try. It filters opportunity through old pain. It frames the future using outdated information. And because it sounds like you, because it uses your voice and your memories, you mistake it for truth. The hardest thing to accept is this: the past is not neutral. It has an agenda. Its goal is continuity, not growth. It wants tomorrow to look like yesterday because that's how it survives. And every time you replay a memory, re-explain a failure, or re-identify with an old version of yourself, you strengthen that grip. This is why designing a future identity feels so uncomfortable. You're not just imagining something new. You're stepping outside the narrative that once made sense of your pain. You're choosing not to let old experiences decide what feels possible. And that feels like betrayal, like abandoning the version of yourself that endured, adapted, and survived. But survival is not the same as direction. You were never meant to stay loyal to the conditions that shaped you. You were meant to outgrow them, and outgrowing them doesn't require anger or denial. It requires forgetting in a very specific way. Not erasing what happened, but releasing its authority over who you're becoming. Because the future doesn't respond to memory. It responds to intention. And the moment you stop asking who you've been and start asking who you are willing to become, something destabilizing happens. The old rules stop applying. The excuses lose their weight. The certainty dissolves. And in that space, where the past can no longer give you instructions, you're left with something terrifying and powerful. Choice. Choice is terrifying because it removes the illusion that your life is already decided. As long as the past is in control, you can explain everything. You can justify your limits. You can say, "This is just how I am," and feel protected by that sentence. But the moment you choose to design a future identity, you lose that shield. There is no longer a story to hide behind. There is only responsibility. Not responsibility for what happened, but responsibility for what happens next. This is why so many people cling to memory, even when it hurts. The past gives you an identity that doesn't ask anything new of you. It tells you who you are without requiring risk. And even pain, when it's familiar, can feel safer than possibility. At least pain has edges you recognize. At least disappointment has a history. The unknown has nothing. No guarantees, no explanations. Just a wide, open silence waiting for you to decide who speaks first. Forgetting the past in the way that actually matters means refusing to let old emotions vote on new decisions. It means understanding that the conclusions you once reached were made with limited information, limited power, and limited perspective. They were coping mechanisms, not prophecies. And yet, most people treat them like laws of nature. Immutable, final, untouchable. You see this every day in the way people introduce themselves, not just to others, but to themselves. I'm bad with money. I'm not creative. I always mess things up. I'm the type of person who burns out. These aren't observations, they're oath. Quiet promises made to the past that say, I will not outgrow you. But identity is not something you discover. It's something you authorize. The future version of you does not need to be proven by past evidence. In fact, if it could be proven, it wouldn't be a future identity at all. It would just be a repetition. Designing who you become requires a clean break from the demand that every step forward be justified by something you've already done. It requires acting without permission from memory. This is where most people freeze. Because once you stop letting the past decide, you also lose the comfort of knowing how the story ends. You lose the script. You lose the familiar rhythm of self-explanation. And for a while, there's nothing to replace it except uncertainty. A quiet, unsettling openness where excuses no longer work, but confidence hasn't arrived yet. That space feels like emptiness, but it isn't. It's absence. The absence of old constraints. The absence of inherited limits. The absence of identities that were built in reaction rather than intention. And if you don't rush to fill it with noise, something unexpected happens. You start to hear a different question forming beneath the fear. Not, who have I been? But, who do I choose to practice becoming? Because identity isn't a single decision. It's repetition. It's behavior performed often enough that it starts to feel natural. The future you isn't waiting to arrive fully formed. They are assembled quietly through actions that feel slightly unfamiliar at first. Choices that don't match your old self-image. Risks that contradict the story you've been telling yourself for years, and at first, those choices will feel fake. Forced, like you're pretending. That's normal. The past always accuses the future of being inauthentic. But authenticity isn't about consistency with history. It's about alignment with direction. You are not dishonest for changing. You are not delusional for acting beyond your past patterns. You are not betraying yourself by refusing to let old pain define new behavior. You are simply updating the narrative with better information. Forgetting the past doesn't mean losing your depth. It means refusing to let depth become a cage. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the future begins to respond. Not because you healed every wound or resolved every memory, but because you stopped consulting them before moving. Momentum replaces rumination, curiosity replaces caution, and the identity you once thought you needed to find starts to emerge through action instead of thought. The future doesn't ask you to erase your past, only to stop letting it speak for you. The moment you choose who you practice becoming is the moment your real life begins.